morning, awesome afternoon, and exciting evening. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends. And today we are here to speak about perseverance. And I have been working with perseverance very strongly recently, but it does work, and we can make anything work as long as we continue working at it. And that's the major thing. Many times we give up before we've had a chance to let whatever we want to do happen, because we think, oh, it's not going to work. But the truth is, it is going to work if we just give it time. I'll tell more of my story later, but Jeanne, can you do your thing so I can get the information to people that we are here, and we are going to have an amazing show today.
Well, I'm happy to do that, Carla. Perseverance is one of those $50 words I like to use. You know, it's more than two syllables. So I wanted to take, before I jump into the quotes, just a second to define it a little bit as we get ready to talk. And this should be a really good, insightful conversation. Perseverance is having the determination to continue pursuing a goal or a course in action in spite of difficulties, struggles, opposition, obstacles, or discouragement. Words like determined, tenacious, dogged, tireless, tenacity, diligence, and committed come up. According to Confucius, it does not matter how slowly you go, so long as you do not stop. So, in other words, just keep your eye on the prize in a way. It's funny how some of our sayings of today come from wisdom from way back when. Thomas Edison, the great inventor, said many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Think about that. Many of life's failures are for people who did not realize how close they were to success before they gave up. That kind of reminds me of it's always darkest before the dawn kind of thinking. And one of our great presidents, in honor of President's Day, John Quincy Adams, said, patience and perseverance have a magical effect before which difficulties disappear and obstacles vanish. So patience and perseverance have a magical effect before which difficulties disappear and obstacles vanish. I repeated that for you, Carla, because we'll talk about that.
I may have it seems to be all right. I will check it. I need to fix something. So okay. You guys please talk while I do some editing on Restream.
Okay. So anyway, I loved talking, looking for quotes on perseverance because it's something we all face. And it's an everyday conundrum, I think. It's a puzzle. And we have to decide, when we talk about between the stimulus and the response, we have to decide, are we going to persevere and reach our goal, or are we going to turn and do something else? And I think in many cases, it feels like we keep turning. We want the adrenaline to pump. We want something else to happen. We want to have action, and we forget what our long-term goals are. So we forget to persevere to be able to get them. Bob, how's that feel for you?
Yeah, I think there are instances, if you continue pursuing down a path, it's kind of like the fly that hits the window and trying to persevere to get through when there's an open door, actually. So one of the things, because this reminds me of the book by Dr. Seuss, Green Eggs and Ham, and then it's Sam I Am persevered by just saying, well, do you like green eggs and ham here, there, everywhere, that kind of stuff. And eventually, Sam I Am uh, got the guy to love green eggs and ham, even though the initially wasn't going to go that way. So if you ever get a chance, that's a good um, story, children's story that I recommend to like salespeople and many other people regarding perseverance. I don't know. Have you read it, Jeanne?
Oh my heavens. I was going to say, I do not like green eggs and hams. I do not like them. Am I am?
I do not like it on a train, on a plane.
My son loved it. And when he was younger, so this was be 30 some odd years ago, if I skipped a word, he could tell me, it's a 3-year-old saying, mommy, you skipped a word, because he knew every single word. So I'm expecting, as my grandchildren grow a little older, that I will get the same with them. There's no shortcuts in green eggs and ham.
No shortcuts at all. Exactly.
But you're right. There is a part of perseverance that feels like the fly that keeps hitting the wall. But that's when you need to step back. And this is what I tell my clients: let's step back. Let's look at the vision and see if there's a way to get where you want to go. Because sometimes you have to make some course corrections. And that's perfectly okay, as long as you keep your eye going on where you're looking at, where you're going. I just had a instance where I was talking with, it was a small group of 8 people. It was highly charged, highly emotional. And it was, after we had an event, we had to do the after action kind of analysis, what worked, what didn't work, but things had fallen apart just before the event. So there was a lot of angst, let's say, about having this conversation. And I opened with, let's go 5,000 feet. Let's look at what we really wanted to accomplish and focus on that. And we were able to get through what could have been, let's call them a bunch of potholes, because we were flying a little higher. And I think perseverance takes a little bit of that insight to look above what's going on in that moment, because there's a lot of noise in the moment. There's a lot of noise and a lot of distraction. And it's, I had a boss that used to say, the devil's in the details. And I looked at him one day and I went, God is in the details, but God has a bigger vision. And he was like, where did that come from? And I was like, in the middle of a crisis, and that's what I used to do in the corporate world. In the middle of a crisis, you can't look at what's happening right here, right now. You have to look at, how do I get through it? What's the best way to get through it? Yep. And so sometimes it's having to say the tough stuff to people that you report to, literally, saying, I got this, you need to sit over there. That's not an easy thing to do, but my job was to hold the space, hold the vision. Where are we going? We're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this stronger. And we're going to do that by, and then that's where my strategy would come in. And I had to repeat it and repeat it. And in the midst of the crisis, repeat it again. And, that can be very frustrating. But what I learned was I was holding space for everybody working the process. And that made me feel a little stronger in my role. And I think that's what's called for every day in this crazy world. And we'll get into, how much information we have thrown at us and how much is wrong, and we're making decisions on sometimes bad information, and does that make us wrong? Not exactly. We have to deal with the information we have. But if we have that higher level vision of where we're going through that, we can course correct. Yep. Jack, you are staring so intently into the screen that, they say, looks could kill, but I know that that's
I don't know that
thinking space.
Yeah, I don't know that that's it has anything to do with the intentionality of it. No, I was just, sort of mulling over the the quandary presented by a limited perspective, right? The fly is drawn intuitively, instinctively by the light, doesn't understand glass, doesn't know glass, but we can observe and watch that it's going to actually exhaust itself and die. And yet, because we have the capacity to be able to reflect and to be able to step back, to be able to look at, what's actually happening, we could see that open door, right? I think, Bob, I know that in my own experience, I've had, I think I watched a NLP training at one point where they were making, a demonstration of what appeared to be a wall or a block to moving forward in a particular situation. But then they showed that the door handle was on the opposite side. That it was a door, but it was a left-hand reach door rather than a right-hand reach door, right? Instead of opening inwards to the room or outwards into a hallway, it was opening outwards in the hallway from the opposite side. And because most of us are conditioned to see a door handle in a particular location, we would easily not notice that there was a door there because we're not being present. We're actually in a trance of conditioning about the way things normally are, right? The map is not the territory. A map of Detroit is not going to help you in New York.
That's true.
Yep. When I think about creating things, because I do that, whether it's writing or other things, it reminds me going back to that story of Bourbon, the Bourbon app. So have you ever heard of Bourbon? Anybody?
Bourbon, the drink?
No, it was an app. It was a geo-tracking app that was done many years ago. Yes,
So
BRNBN. That was the name of it. And the founders, the creators, they put everything into this app. It had all the bells and whistles and everything, and they decided to go ahead and launch it. And instead of doing their due diligence to find out if people wanted it, but they were persistent in terms of getting it out there, and it didn't do well at all. But one of the things they did make adjustments. They looked at the app, they went in, and from the feedback that it was in real-time feedback, they learned it was a particular part of the app that people really wanted. And so it was that part where they could post pictures and everything and share pictures. It was a social media app. And so they took it off the market. They scrapped Bourbon. They focused on that one feature, and they relaunched it later on. Now, I want you to guess the name of the app. They relaunched it as Instagram.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. They relaunched it, and after 18 months, they sold it to Facebook. I think for $1 billion, or $1.5 billion, something like that.
So they decided not to go against, not to compete against all of the what I call the 800-pound gorillas in social media, but really find the one feature that made them stand out.
Correct.
So course correction is something that's really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times we can get stuck in a certain position when we're going after something. And I like what you said, Jeanne, in terms of going and looking from a higher perspective. What is what is it that we really want? What is that vision? So maybe what we were doing down here wasn't really connected to that overall vision of where we wanted to go. And I think the developers of bourbon realized that, so they focused on a one thing that fulfilled that and where they wanted to go, and then they had a hit. So yeah.
Although,
And by the way, I was one of the adopters of bourbon, and it was kind of confusing.
yeah, well, I like the name BRBN bourbon,
Yeah.
but that's because I have a friend who's a let's just call him a bourbon gourmet.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's why I was like, my first thought was the drink.
Yeah.
He kind of tastes bourbon like you would taste wine. And I always say, I'll be your driver. Thanks.
It was kind of a confusing name for that app too. Basically it was like people going to places like restaurants and all these kind of places, and then they would show where they're at, and then would take pictures of where they're at, like that. So it would track you where you're at. And
yeah, keep in mind back in the day when they were trying to launch, one of the biggest attractions for social media was taking pictures of your food, and it still is. So that makes sense to me on one level. And the other is, I've been in technology so long, there's an urban myth, but I'm sure it's built on some level of truth. But a company was searching for a name and they couldn't find a name. Every time they would, put one out, their lawyers would do the searches and find there was a trademark or a copyright or something. And so they said, we'll be Soul Fan. And they went, Soul Fan? What does that mean? Sick of looking for a name. We can be ingenious when we look above, whatever the let's call it adventure. I think I've shared with Carla in the past, and I think it was one of the quotes I used. Kennedy famously said this, but it goes back to the ancients. But the word crisis in Chinese is made up of two symbols. One is danger and one is opportunity. So when we're in the midst of a project and we run into what I'm going to refer to as adventure versus crisis, there's an opportunity in it. And that's where perseverance really comes in. It's trying to recognize, kind of, to get a little way up there, what's the universe telling me? What do I need to do? How do I answer this? So in the midst of literally, I had a client who needed to part ways with us, and I was devastated. I really liked working with this client. And the day that they let us know, I worked at an agency, and the day they let us know, I was in my office feeling really bad, and I got these beautiful bright yellow roses sent to me. Now I can tell you on the number of one hand how many times I've had roses sent to me, to be honest with you. So I remember this one very well. And the card was from my client, and she told me that, crisis is dangerous, opportunity. Please look at this as an opportunity. Kind of made me feel better, but I was a bit confused, and so eventually we went out for a drink and I asked her about it, and she was telling me that the reason they were parting had nothing to do with me and the work I was doing, and that she wanted, the best of luck and all that. So I felt better about it, but that stayed with me throughout my career. Whenever anything happens, I think dangerous opportunity. So that's one of the ways that I say the universe tries to wake us up. They put something in front of us that we have to be present for, that we have to be mindful of, so we're not hitting like the fly against the window. Carla.
Yeah. Remember 2 minutes?
You're back? Okay. Bob, you look ready to jump in.
No, I'm back actually. I think he just went mute.
Maybe my, I have been dealing with some issues since October. And yesterday I was about to give up. Can you hear me? Are we frozen?
No, we can hear you, but you are breaking up a little bit. So the internet
Okay.
where you're at,
My internet may be a problem today because of where I am. But part of the problem was, where would I be living because of a problem, a leak in my apartment? And yesterday it was at a point that I thought I was breaking. I just couldn't handle it anymore. But I persevered, and as I kept on working at it and taking breaks in order to keep my sanity, because it was definitely going downhill quickly, I found, I'm sorry, the dog is being a little strange. I found that perseverance needed to be done and that everything could be found. And thank you, Jack, for saying, let me calm you down. I immediately calmed down, as you know. And this morning, after 6 months of dealing with this and 3 weeks of dealing with this situation with the condo board, I got not only everything I wanted to be able to stay in a place that was livable, but I got my car. I will be able to bring my car. They're going to pay for the car. They're going to pay for the pet deposit. But it was just knowing that I knew things could work out. And sometimes we give up before we get over that hump. We're getting to the hump, and then we're like, oh no, I just can't make it. But I think what we need to remember is to take those extra 2 or 3 steps and see where it takes us. And perseverance is taking those extra 2 steps to get to the top. My 2 cents for the day.
Yeah, sometimes we do have to persevere through things that that are challenging at the time. And Jeannie, you started off with the definition and everything. And I can recall when I was doing, this is in 2007, I was doing an NLP practitioner, basic practitioner training at Countrywide. And on the very last day, I had a kidney stone attack, which, like, I've been dealing with that recently, and it was very painful. Started in the morning, and I had to do the training throughout the whole day, and it was tough. And so I had to, like, blank that out of my mind, do everything I could to deliver an excellent training. So by the time I got done, it was done, and so the pain had actually increased at that time. And so I gave them all their certificates, and then I ended up like, okay, now I just need to deal with this pain. But I managed to persevere through that day of training, which is the first time I've ever had to do that, speaking or training, and just dealing with that kind of pain. So we all go through challenges, and sometimes we have to figure out a way of getting through them. Jack or Jeanne?
Well, I got a degree in philosophy, of all things, right? Super marketable degree. Quite possibly saved my life at the time because I found so much meaning in what I was doing. It was extraordinarily valuable for me at the time. But based on my educational background, most people wouldn't think I was prepared for it. that I could do it. And it was a lot of hard work. There were lots of all-nighters. There were multiple 3-4 day runs, of doing things, largely essay test, answers and so forth. And you really had to know the material, and you had to actually, understand it and be able to talk from multiple perspectives about it. So that was probably one of the most difficult, persevering experiences, because I really had a desire to fulfill by the accomplishment of that degree, by the discovery of the material, and by working in it. And I found it so enriching as I went through that process, that there was a lot of self-fulfillment, and the payoff was worth it. And a lot of times people give up along the way. Now, there were lots of places along that process where I discovered shorter cuts, right? Better study habits, more proactive behaviors. That made things a lot easier. By the time I was a senior, preparing for tests and being ready for things was not an issue. What I didn't know as a freshman, I had already been able to take into account.
It's amazing how we learn life's lessons by actually living life. And that's where perseverance really comes in. One of my favorite jokes to bring up is just, when somebody's going over and over about what they're planning to do, and I say, you know how to make God laugh. Tell him your plans. Because there's always a way that the universe says, I'll show you. You can do better. You can do so much more. And that's, I think, the mistake we do when we let our ego kind of lead the way, because the ego knows what's in this plane, what's in this time, and doesn't necessarily see 3 days out, doesn't necessarily see 2 years away. When we would discuss strategy, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this project? And we would discuss strategy. I was always surprised at how many times people would think about strategy in the matter of weeks. And I'm thinking, strategy's a lot more than just a couple of weeks. When you're working on a project, you need to be looking a year out, 3 years out, sometimes even longer. And when I could get my team to look beyond I don't want to use the word crisis, but the problem of the day, and look at the overall effects of what we wanted, so we would do much better. So I would say, let's start with the end in mind, which comes from Stephen Covey. What are the results we really want to get, and then how do we get there? And at the time I thought that's just normal. And then when I got out into working with individuals more than corporate kind of projects, I realized that's not so normal. For me, it's something that anybody would do, right? But no, that's because I'm used to it. This is the way I think, but not everybody thinks this way. And that's why when Carla and I were talking about the theme for this week, I was well, she'll remember, I kind of chuckled a little and said perseverance, because I know what she's going through with the condo and everything. And, in the midst of one of the quote unquote crises, I said, think of it as an adventure. And okay, Carla will back me up on this. She was like, I can't. But then, as we were talking about it, it's like, there's different ways, different perspectives that we can all look at. When I was raising my son, who was a very active child, periodically I had to bring in a babysitter or take him to my mother's because I had to travel for business. Oh, I got to travel for business. It's so hard. But, there was study that showed that women take their inbox with them when they travel for business because it's quiet time and they can catch up on everything. And that wasn't what drove me when I had to travel for business. I like the idea of being able to take an uninterrupted bubble bath, because when you're raising a child on your own, you don't have that quiet time. So I would find things that I would relish, and add that to my travel, So I had a great ritual about, and Carlos heard me say this: baking soda and Epsom salts and a little bubble bath so that I would relax. That's something I couldn't do at home. So when I replaced, something I'm looking forward to rather than something I drudged, then it was easier for me to manage everything. And then it kind of reinforced itself after I took a vacation with my then 2-year-old son and realized I needed a vacation after that vacation. And that's what, sometimes business travel was my little vacations of, life in adulthood. Yeah. So there is ways to change your perception that allows you to be more tenacious, more doggedly focused on what's going on, despite what shows up, despite obstacles, despite people discouraging you because they're not holding the same vision that you are. There's a lot of things that show up in our lives that are actually, we might interpret as negative, but are actually positive prods, if you will, moving us forward.
Mhm. Yeah, in fact, when you mentioned adventure, it reminded me of the Navy commercial from years and years ago, where they ended up, it's not just a job, it's an adventure. So they reframe being in the Navy. Whereas you go back to, I believe it was the 70s, where the Marines now, because I was in the Marines, they framed it as being tough. We never promised you a rose garden kind of framing. And so people that wanted that kind of thing, they wanted to go in something where, it was tough. In the Navy, it was an adventure, you get to sail all around the world. Not all the time. I know a lot of people who are in the Navy who didn't do that, or in submarine, they were underwater most of the time. But yeah, it was an adventure. I think all branches of the military, you go into some kind of adventure in one form or another. So it was that reframing, and I'm glad you used that, because we can go across any kind of circumstance, and it can be very challenging. But if we reframe it as that adventure, it becomes doable. And you can take it even at bite-sized pieces. I'm going to get through this part. I'm going to get through this part. I'm going to get through this part. Just like that old adage, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And so it's kind of like that. So you persist through the whole elephant. And I would like to hear, Jack, and some of your wisdom regarding philosophy on this.
Well, I think that even Stoicism uses reframing in order to be able to stick to an issue or a so-called problem. But I think what I was learning the majority of my corporate experience, initially was systems to be able to how to run an organization by its own standards and procedures. But as I took more leadership responsibility, and as I grew in my experience, what I ended up finding a lot of times is there were commonalities that were shared in the industry, which were considered truisms, which were in fact completely mythical. They weren't true. One of the common statements was, you can't hire good people, right? It's advanced babysitting, were sort of frames that my peers would have about the people that they worked with. And I think a combination of the philosophy and some of the personal development work that I had started to get involved with turned me more in the direction of, well, it's really a function of intentionality. It's what is your intention in as an outcome in a particular situation, and how can you make it the most positive outcome possible? I remember in particular a specific book called Don't Shoot the Dog, which was written by a couple of Hollywood animal trainers. And it was referenced largely their first experience working with dolphins. And one of the things they noticed was that dolphins in particular paid no attention whatsoever to negative reinforcement, unlike every other animal that they'd ever worked with. If they tried to use any negative reinforcement, the dolphin would just swim away. Fish, positive reinforcement, what they like to do, they do all kinds of stuff to jump through hoops and things to get fish. Any negative reinforcement wouldn't work. Well, my experience is that that's largely true of people. And a lot of business organizations are structured around some form of punishment, not unlike much of our society, as though people are bad and they need to be corrected more than they are uninformed or inexperienced and need to be guided and shown an opportunity to be held in the highest possible sense so that they can do their best work. And I've had past employees reach out to me and say, thank you for the leadership training that they got as a 16-year-old hostess and now are using to defend children's rights in Riverside County. It's just a different perspective, but the outcomes, the results, and the motivation on the parts of people and how they looked at coming to work was completely different from when I had that more picayune, specific, pointed, critical attention. It didn't work. Find people doing things right was a saying that became a mantra for me.
That's a great story, and it's very true. When I was managing adults in one of my corporate roles, I actually started telling them to call me coach. It was before we got into life coaching and all the personal coaching, but I had three strong managers that were all male, and I could tell that every once in a while it would bristle when they would hear me say something, like, I don't think that they actually thought this way, but it felt like, I don't need to listen to you. I'm going to listen to this guy that's your boss. So I was being overlooked. And then in the midst of a very big project, the one that would make our year for my department, we did have a crisis, and they didn't want to tell me. They wanted to protect me. And that's what I realized. They were trying to protect me. They weren't overlooking. And I looked at this one young man and I said, "Who am I?" And he goes, "You're my boss." I went, No. Who am I? He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Right now, I'm Bruce Bochy, the manager of the Giants, and you're Madison Bumgarner, my key pitcher. And you just broke your arm. Do you tell me or not?" He goes, "Well, of course I would tell you. You have to schedule a different pitcher." I go, "Exactly. So why not tell me there's a problem so that we can collaborate and find the solution and make things work?" And that was a turning point with that particular team that I was working with, because they were afraid that I would be upset. And I was like, "No, that's not my role. My role is to help you through." And I literally became a personal coach for these three young managers that led up. I had a big team, but they're the ones that were, my go-to people. And when we made that switch, and it became more, what can we do together versus how do I compete for attention? It was a gestalt kind of moment for my team. And so it was really looking for, how do we coalesce and support each other, versus what I always felt in the work world was kind of a competition. And I find that with any obstacle, it's looking for, what do you put your attention on? And I think it was you, Jack, that talked about intention. And when you understand your intention, you know where to put your attention. And that's part of the process, and why it's important, in the work that I do, to go up, to 5,000 feet and take a look at, what are we trying to do? What is it that we're working on? Where do we want to go? I don't remember who said it, but if you don't have a plan, you're exactly where you need to be. It's always brought up about, if you're looking at a map and you need to go somewhere, if you don't know where you're going, just get on a road. You're just going to kind of lollygag around. But the idea of knowing where you're going, knowing what's going to happen, helps us alleviate that momentary crisis kind of thinking, because we know we can keep stepping forward. Like the eating an elephant one bite at a time. I don't remember if it was Confucius or Lao Tzu who said, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. But you can go 1,000 miles in the wrong direction if you don't know where you're going. And that's where intention comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I do. I keep this board, and one of them is like this right here: set your intention, stay focused. And also I added this one: say no. Because
isn't that one of the words that nobody seems to know how to say?
Yep. Yeah. That is like very difficult. I think a lot of people, because and especially people that are helpers like us, it's hard for us to say no. But I learned a long time ago that we can't be all things to all people, and people will ask us to do this and this and this and this. And it reminded me back in the 90s, one of my good friends, and she was involved in all kinds of things. And one of the things, when you become on the board of directors of a nonprofit, all these other nonprofits will ask you to be on it. And she could not say no. And she was running two businesses at the time. Her name is was Rose, and she was also asked to run for city council, and she could not refuse, and just overwhelmed her. And her husband just didn't want to tell her to stop. So she was doing all this. She won all these awards and everything, and she couldn't say no. And then one day her husband found her in a bathroom. She had committed suicide, and violently took a pistol, and because she couldn't say no, that she was involved in all these, and I think had she set the right intention, I think that was very important, and just focused on that. What is the bigger vision? Wasn't all these things. So I think saying no is important, so we can focus on that intention, that vision, and that particular focus, and in perseverance. We want to have that as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of a sad story, and I know it happens all too often that people get overwhelmed. It's actually one of the things that I bring to my coaching business, because the way I approach it is, I get to hold the space for you until you can hold it for yourself. In other words, I'm going to work myself out of the job. And that's not always easy for others to understand, because they're in the midst of their own personal crises. And the other thing that I've learned is, sometimes and I probably should have gone through, college to become a therapist at this point, but sometimes you just need to sit and listen and draw information out. But if you listen carefully and know how to pull information, people will fix their own issues because you help them to see it. And I'm amazed that this thing we call our brain is so dang good at processing information, but we get so enamored with being busy that we don't listen to ourselves. And part of persevering is knowing why. Why am I putting up with this? Why do I struggle to make ends meet? Oh, I'm raising a family. Okay, why do I struggle with my job? Oh, this is the career I chose because, Jack, what's up? I can see you.
Well,
processing there.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Bob tell the story of this unfortunate woman who couldn't say no. And the challenge that I think that happens for a lot of folks is that they don't realize we as a species have a hard time noticing our own patterns unless we have some sort of education in it, unless we are prone to taking that reflective view, meditating, using some process or tool to be able to get outside of our own initial limited pattern of behavior that got us to where we are, but will not get us to where we want to go. Will not necessarily give us satisfaction, but was very useful in surviving perhaps challenging experiences. And I know from my own history that, trauma is a thing. One of the things that I end up doing with a lot of my clients is helping them disconnect energetically from their histories, from the charge that could have them going in a direction to create more problems for themselves, more discord and challenge than they need to be experiencing, than is necessary, right? Sometimes conflict is productive and helpful. Often it's unnecessary and brought with us as a consequence of not having a bigger picture, a better view, a different perspective, or a piece of information that we're just perhaps overlooking, like as clearly as the nose on our own face, because it's so close and has been so present all along that we just don't know it. Which kind of brings me to, an old saying. There was an old fish swimming along one morning, and two young fish swam by, and he said, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish look at each other and they say, "What's water?"
I'm smiling too because, we can't see the nose on our face unless we're looking in a mirror or a picture. So that's being way too close.
Yeah, we need mirrors for a car or backup cameras or other tools to be able to have perspective where we cannot see or have a clear vision. And yet at the same time, I think it's absolutely true, and I've certainly heard Tony Robbins say this before, and that is, without a vision, the people perish. Not have a bad day, they perish. So human beings really, really need something to look forward to have a vision for what's possible, so that there's something to create in terms of, and something to draw them forward. Otherwise, we end up looking so much at the now that sometimes circumstances that are just challenging or difficult look impossible and hopeless. And we can't get to that next moment where we see the door handle on the other side or the ladder next to the wall. Or get creative and think, oh, I can use that rope to get me over the wall.
Yeah.
Or around a few steps to the right. Oh, look, the wall ends. You know, it's we have so much faith driving at night that we trust headlamps showing us only 200 feet in advance. We trust, paint stripe in the middle of the road, but we're often afraid of what we don't know because we haven't experienced it yet. And there's a presumption, certainly in I think fight or flight situations, and there's a tendency in our society, I think, to create unnecessary fight or flight, where once people perceive that they have danger, their capacity to look at a bigger picture and to take a fuller view, right, changes. Certainly from hypnosis, the broader perspective, or what gets in Huna, right, the ancient Hawaiian tradition, Haklao, the learning state, is to have that full capacity to sort of see almost behind your own head, the real full perspective of what our eyes are capable of providing to us, or the utilization of more full awareness of our senses. But when we're grinding and we have, difficulty as the portrayal of what all life experience is, sometimes we persevere through things that were fictive. They were made up. They didn't need to be perceived. Even, I've got an acquaintance who wrote a book. The problem is the way you see the problem.
Perception, perspective.
Yeah. It's we, through a limited perspective, through forming a viewpoint without looking in our mirrors or getting reference points outside of our limited perspective, we can create problems where they don't actually exist. A mentor tells a story about a dog that owns a business and hires a couple of consultants to help him solve the problem of this dastardly problem that he has in the business, and he just can't find this character that keeps running around. He sees evidence that he's been in the business and that things have happened and he's such a problem. And the consultants, observe for a couple of hours, then can, talk to each other and say, well, we've got some good news and we've got some bad news. And the good news is it's your tail.
There's a reason we say it takes a village. I typically use that when I'm talking about raising kids and, things, but it's bringing people together so you see other points of view and we can see the lessons that we can learn. And, that's one of the things that I find in managing problems, if you will, is there's always a lesson. And if we can learn the lesson, we can move beyond. But if we don't stop to look for the lesson, we keep repeating the problem. And the wise elders in your village might sit back and go, let's look at the problem a little differently, because they can see something that I can't. And when I say the village elders, sometimes they're the village youngers. I am amazed at some of the wisdom I get from my younger friends. And I look at them like, you're 22. Where did you learn this? I'm just amazed at how clear some folks can be at very young ages. But we need to hear all these perspectives, because that helps make ours more of a full-fledged perspective. Because we can only see, if as you're talking about the learning area, that's a 180-degree vision, because you can only go so far physically. Being able to sense what's behind you, which, by the way, every mother knows, because we tell our kids moms have eyes in the back of their head. Just want to keep that going. But it's other people who tell you what's going on back here that enlightens you. So it's really important to have that support system available when you are persevering through something and finding obstacles, to look at something a little bit different, to see, is there a different way? Is there a road on this map that's not marked? Maybe I should turn on this road. There's views of Hawaii, for example. I think it's either Kauai or Maui. I don't quite recall, but there's a section that you can't get to by car. I think it's Kauai. You can't get there at all by car. So you either have to hike or get in a helicopter for one of the helicopter tours. You will never see this part of the island by road. So that means you have to be open to a different mode of travel to be able to see this lush, beautiful landscape. I will tell you, I've been in a helicopter once, and it was to go see that. And yeah, probably not getting in a helicopter again. That's only because the guy decided to show off, and he went into one of the canyons and then flipped sideways to flip around. He was showing off. And yeah, I'm not a big helicopter lover anymore.
It's fun when you get to jump off of helicopters.
Yeah, that's not something I look forward to anymore, but you're the one that does parkour.
Well, no, this is when I was in Force Recon. Part of our thing is just jumping or rappelling off of helicopters.
It makes me understand why you do parkour now, because that fear is gone.
I don't know if the fear's gone as much. I think fear keeps me aware of what's going on, but I never let it consume me. There's a difference. It keeps my awareness up, and I use it. Yeah, I use it to be able to get through, and it's almost like a kickstart before I get into a state of flow, like in parkour, like that kind of stuff. So
I think that's a really good. Yeah, it's a really good point to bring up, Bob, because most of us are afraid of fear. When we feel fearful, we stop and we don't move through, whether it's fear physically, like jumping out of a helicopter, or fear to step forward and go out on a stage and talk in public, or fear to just stand up for yourself in a meeting and say, I have an idea, you need to listen to me. We stop ourselves, and it's usually based on a fear that we don't know how to walk through. And that's part of perseverance.
Yeah, I think the adrenaline part, because if a person puts that adrenaline into a certain context, it can create that fear that stops a person, or the same adrenaline can create an excitement of being able to move forward towards something. So I noticed that now, like if I start feeling fear, I redirect it to that point of excitement that, oh, I'm going to use it because this is going to make me more powerful. It's going to make me stronger. So I use it in terms of that way. So I feel it where it's coming up, and then I redirect it and then reframe it as something that's super powerful versus something that's going to make me weak.
That's a nice way to come back around to redirecting and reframing that we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Well, and I think, Bob, that especially because of the background in the military and the specific forces that you were part of, it's a necessity to function, and having that conditioning, I'm sure, has helped you in other areas of life, where I think that one of the challenges that a lot of folks have is that they, because of the, I like to say, the FX that we have, the capacity for our body to reflect whatever it is that we happen to be thinking in the moment. A lot of people, and I certainly know that in my own case, that's been the case at times, I have experienced fear that is imaginary versus danger, which is real. And sort of a reframe on the fear thing is, fear is the process by which we scare ourselves. Danger is something that's actually potentially threatening to our lives or well-being, which is why the system exists in the first place, to get us attentive to being present to that cliff or overhanging tree or whatever it may be that is actually a dangerous situation or circumstance. But similarly, I mean, just as we as a society don't teach people these very, very simple things when they're growing up, they're just sort of taken for granted in many cases. The idea about the Hawklow state, right, which, as Jeanne pointed out, is about 180 degrees, but the truth is that we can actually see further than that. Our peripheral vision actually goes further than 180 degrees if we actually utilize it fully, because of the capacity of our eyes. And tests show that it lowers blood pressure when we're in that peripheral vision state. Longtime NLP practitioner Paul Sheely teaches a form of speed reading called photo reading, which one of the parts of is to use this peripheral vision capacity to see an orange or an apple at the top of the back of one's head in order to open up one's capacity to fully subconsciously receive the reading material that's in front of us, rather than use the fine detailed attentiveness, which tends to not only constrict our perspective, but also raises our blood pressure and increases the stress responses that we experience. And people simply just don't know this, just like the mind-blowing effectiveness of simple practices like mindfulness can really make a difference in people's days and lives.
I think that's really interesting. But we're coming up to the end of the show. We kind of went over a little bit. So I know Carla needs to wrap it up a little. I want to just throw in kind of the commercial that I do for her. We have. Pardon? Can I say something? Oh, please, yes. Carla, you're here.
I mean, I've been trying for a while. I just think when we're talking about perseverance, that we don't give up. And that's the whole point. Many people give up before they give it a chance to work. And with that, we are going to end the show now. We are a little over, and it is time to end it. I want to thank Jack and Bob and Jeanne for being here. And I'm always very, very grateful that we can do this show on a regular basis. And I want to say goodbye for today, but I want Jeanne to do her little commercial, and then we'll wave goodbye and we will be gone.
Okay. So you're watching us through a number of formats, but we run live on YouTube. It's Giggle Fest University on YouTube. So please join us there. Subscribe to the channel. That helps us. as well as anytime you're open to leaving a comment or to sharing the links. That helps us with the YouTube algorithm to help get the show a wider audience, and we appreciate your support with that. Also, Carla has a page on patreon.com. It's called Giggle Lady, and that supports the show and helps us get what we need to keep the show going. So if you are of the mind, please visit Giggle Lady on patreon.com and consider donating. Those that donate $5 or more a month, their name gets put into a raffle, and Carla every month pulls out one of those names and gifts a half-hour conversation online with her. And if you've ever listened to any of her interviews, you find that that's a really great opportunity. So please consider patreon.com Giggle Lady. Carla, back to you.
And we're going to end the show now. We will be back on Thursday. I know that we have Cameron Risby, and we will continue to talk on perseverance. And let's wave goodbye, everyone. And we are going off air. Thank you for watching, and thank you again, Jeanne and Jack and Bob, for being here.